We stand today at a precipice of understanding, looking out over a landscape where the boundaries between theoretical physics, high-level governance, and the very nature of human consciousness are beginning to blur. To understand the current moment in scientific history, we must first address a concept that has long been relegated to the fringes of academic discourse, but is now moving inexorably toward the center of serious inquiry. This is the concept of the legacy program. For decades, there has been a persistent signal amidst the noise of conspiracy and folklore, suggesting that humanity has not been operating alone. The legacy program refers to a hypothesized, deeply compartmentalized effort within the highest levels of global defense structures, dedicated to the recovery and reverse engineering of non-human technologies. When we speak of recovered alien craft, we are not speaking of simple mechanical objects, but of devices that challenge our fundamental understanding of materials science and propulsion. These are artifacts that do not adhere to the aerodynamic principles we have refined over a century of flight, but instead suggest a mastery of the underlying geometry of spacetime itself. To comprehend how such technology might operate, we must pivot our attention to the hard sciences, specifically the geometry of waves and the current stagnation in fundamental physics. For the better part of a century, since the great revolutions of the early 20th century that gave us general relativity and quantum mechanics, we have been marching toward a unification of forces. However, we have arguably reached a wall, a theoretical impasse that some have termed the end of physics. The standard model of particle physics, while incredibly successful at predicting experimental results, is widely regarded as a beautiful but broken structure. It is a catalog of parts without an instruction manual for the whole. The work of mathematicians and physicists like Dr. Eric Weinstein suggests that the way forward is not through smashing particles together at ever higher energies, but through a radical reevaluation of the geometric stage upon which these interactions occur. We must look at the universe not as a container of objects, but as a manifold, a complex, multidimensional shape where waves and particles are merely ripples in the fabric of reality. This geometric perspective becomes essential when we grapple with the mysteries of the invisible universe. When we look at the night sky, we are seeing less than 5% of what actually exists. The vast majority of the cosmos is composed of dark matter and dark energy. Conventional astronomy treats dark matter as a gravitational filler, a passive scaffolding that holds galaxies together. However, we must entertain a far more disquieting and profound possibility. If dark matter possesses its own complexity, its own chemistry, and its own structure, it is theoretically possible that it hosts its own forms of life. We could be sharing our immediate space, even our own planet, with invisible beings or entities composed of this dark sector material. These entities would interact with us only through gravity, passing through our distinct baryonic matter as if we were ghosts to them, and they to us. This is not mysticism. It is a logical extrapolation of the idea that the dark sector is as rich and complex as the light sector we inhabit. The tools we use to probe these mysteries are evolving at a rate that outpaces human intuition. We are witnessing a revolution in scientific discovery, driven by artificial intelligence. The breakthrough of AlphaFold, an AI system that solved the 50-year-old protein folding problem, demonstrates that machine intelligence can perceive patterns in high-dimensional data that are invisible to the biological human mind. This has profound implications for the future of physics. If AI can decode the language of biology, which is the code of life, it stands to reason that systems like Grok or its successors could be turned toward the code of the cosmos. We may soon find that the next Einstein is not a human being, but a silicon-based intelligence capable of manipulating the variables of string theory or geometric unity to reveal the true equations of the universe. However, the pursuit of these truths has not always been an open or democratic process. There is a shadow history of science that diverges from the public narrative somewhere in the mid-20th century. We must consider the possibility of secret anti-gravity experiments conducted in the 1950s. During this era, there was a flurry of interest in manipulating gravity and electromagnetic fields to achieve lift without rocketry. This research seemingly vanished from the public record, moving into what is often called the deep state or the black budget world. This divergence created two tracks of human knowledge: the public track, taught in universities and published in journals, and a classified track, where breakthroughs in propulsion and energy generation may have been sequestered. This suppression is often enforced through a culture of ridicule and compartmentalization, ensuring that those who work on these programs are waved off or bigoted against by the mainstream scientific community. The suppression of this knowledge relates directly to the geopolitical stability of our world. We live under the constant, albeit often ignored, threat of nuclear annihilation. The urgency to develop off-world capabilities and to understand the physics of planetary escape is driven by the realization that Earth is a single point of failure for our species. The narrative warfare we see today, where information is weaponized and podcasters become targets of global repudiation, is essentially a battle for control over the consensus reality. Figures who challenge the established order, whether in politics or technology, are often attempting to break the seal on this forbidden knowledge, disrupting the carefully managed status quo that has held since the end of the Second World War. We must also reconsider our place in the cosmic hierarchy through the lens of the North Sentinel Island theory. Just as the indigenous tribe on North Sentinel Island is protected and isolated by the Indian government, unaware of the global civilization that surrounds them, humanity may be living in a protected or quarantined zone of the galaxy. Advanced intelligences may observe us, perhaps even intervene subtly, but largely leave us to our own devices to see if we can survive our own technological adolescence. If we are indeed being visited, it suggests that we are not the apex intelligence we assume ourselves to be, but rather a developing species under study. One of the most mind-bending concepts that emerges from high-level theoretical physics is the true nature of time. We perceive time as a linear river, flowing from the past into the future. However, mathematical models that incorporate 6 dimensions, 3 of space and 3 of time, suggest a far more navigable structure. In such a framework, time travel is not a paradox, but a geometric maneuver. Just as we can move freely through space, a sufficiently advanced understanding of these extra dimensions could allow for movement across the temporal landscape. This might involve a concept known as pinch-to-zoom for the universe, where the metric of spacetime itself is manipulated to bridge vast distances or epochs, effectively shrinking the universe to a manageable scale for travel. There are historical nodes where this pursuit of quantum gravity and fundamental understanding flourished, sometimes in unexpected places. The Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, for example, represents one such node where the intellectual heritage of the East met the rigorous formalism of Western physics. It is in these intersections that the next great breakthroughs often ferment. The quest is not just for a unified field theory, but for an understanding of the very source of reality's parameters. Ultimately, this scientific journey leads us back to theological questions. When we examine the fine-tuning of the universe, the precise values of the fundamental constants that allow for stars, chemistry, and life to exist, we are confronted with the concept of degrees of freedom. In mathematics, degrees of freedom represent the number of independent values that can vary in a system. If the universe has a limited number of degrees of freedom, it implies constraints, and constraints imply a design or a designer. The view of God through the lens of mathematical degrees of freedom moves theology away from anthropomorphic figures and toward a concept of a supreme, necessary order, a source code that dictates the geometry of waves, the behavior of dark matter, and the emergence of consciousness itself. We are exploring a reality that is likely far stranger, more populated, and more intricately constructed than our current standard models can possibly describe.